Some souls are called to rest at sea. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and recently I've been chattering away about military burial honors, and one of you asked about burial at sea, and it turns out that's a pretty interesting option. Every year, the U.S. Navy commits something like 1,500 souls to the deep, and if that's something that's interesting to you, well, let's take a look at it. Let's just start with eligibility. The Navy will bury your remains at sea if you were an active duty member of the Uniformed Services, a civilian Marine of the Military Sealift Command, or the dependent family member of active duty retirees or veterans. That said, I do want to warn you that burial at sea by the U.S. Navy has like a predictable amount of bureaucratic rigmarole. Not that we can't overcome the paperwork, but it is enough that you might want to clarify with your loved one whether they want to be buried at sea by the U.S. Navy or simply by a seagoing vessel, and you'll see what I mean in a second. Okay, presuming that your loved one does want a military burial at sea by the Navy, the best place to start is at the Military OneSource page for the Burial at Sea program. But Military OneSource is going to send you almost immediately to the Navy's webpage for this program. And while the information on those two pages seems to be identical, I am confident that if there's a discrepancy, the Navy is going to be the official source. The process starts by contacting My Navy Career Center and requesting a Burial at Sea request package. This includes a request form and then 3 documents that are going to get added. These include a photocopy of the death certificate, a copy of the DD-214, and either the cremation certificate or the burial transit permit. This is all just paperwork and probably not too big a deal, except for one fiddly little bit if you're dealing with the remains of an active duty service member. Burial at sea can only be requested by the person authorized to direct disposition, or the PAD. And the thing is that active duty service members have an emergency data record, a DD Form 93 that they update annually. And on that form, the service member specifies their PAD. The point being, you might run into a bit of trouble if the person requesting the burial at sea is not the PAD listed on that DD-93. But, like I said, that should only be an issue for folks who passed away while on active duty. Anyways, once you get the paperwork straight, there's a couple of administrative things that you're going to have to deal with. Probably the biggest one is that the Navy is going to conduct the ceremony from a ship that is deployed at sea. That means that family members are not going to be able to be present when the ceremony occurs. The commander of the ship will provide the family members with the date and the time and the longitude and the latitude where the ceremony occurred, but only after the committal is complete. What's more, the average amount of time between when the remains arrive at the point of embarkation and the actual conduct of the ceremony, well, it can average 12 to 18 months. These 2 points, along with a detail about the burial flag that I'll discuss in a second, lead me to suggest that the family members might want to finish paying their respects before they send the remains off to the Navy. One of the reasons I say this actually has to do with the burial flag. The Navy does not provide a flag to the family. Now, if the family provides their own flag, the Navy will use that specific flag during the ceremony, and then they'll return it to the family afterwards. But if the family does not provide a flag, well, the Navy's going to use the flag that they have on the ship, and they are not going to give that flag to the family. And all of this might seem a little strange because the Military Funeral Honors program does provide the family with a flag. But to me, this just reinforces the idea that the family should complete the military honors program before sending the remains off to be buried at sea. Kind of treat them like two different programs. This next point has to do with the condition of the remains. You can have a burial at sea with so-called intact remains or casketed remains, but the vast majority of burial at seas are conducted with cremated remains. Casketed remains come with some additional special requirements. For instance, special transportation permits. And then you have to coordinate with a local funeral home for storage. And there's a limitation on the ports that can support that kind of a burial. And bear in mind that the cost of all this special handling is the obligation of the family, not the Navy. And then, even cremated remains come with a special rule that the urn cannot be plastic. Metal, stone, salt, cardboard, marble, that's all fine. But the Navy can't be putting more plastic into the ocean. Now, before we wrap up, there is one final point that's worth making, and that is that there are 5 Navy ports that support the Burial at Sea program: Norfolk, Virginia, Jacksonville, Florida, San Diego, California, Bremerton, Washington, and Honolulu, Hawaii. And each of these ports has a coordinator for the Burial at Sea program. The weird thing about this, at least to me, is that most families will be mailing the cremated remains of their loved one to these coordinators. That comes with some obvious hazards, and even the Navy website recommends that family use Priority Express mailing with tracking numbers and signature at delivery. In fact, it's a really good idea to talk to the coordinator before you mail anything to them. And maybe, on that note, I can kind of see why somebody would want to be buried at sea. It sounds like one last grand adventure to leave the warm embrace of your family, cross the country, not knowing what's going to happen, link up with a bunch of soldiers who are about to go to sea, and then go on one final mission. When you put it that way, it sounds pretty cool. And if that sounds cool to you, you might want to do your next of kin a favor and get some key paperwork lined up so this program is easy for them to take advantage of. Particularly that DD-214, and if you're interested in getting a copy or understanding the copies, watch one of these videos.